Programming Throwdown, episode 62, PHP and Hack. Take it away, Jason.
Hey everyone, welcome back. First podcast of the year. Unless you're on the Chinese New Year, then I think this is like nearing the end of your year, right? Is that true?
I think,
isn't it?
Yeah,
like
no, I think it starts like next week.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Well,
okay.
it depends on when this is released.
Oh, yeah, good point. Touche. So yeah, maybe
January
this will
28th.
be the beginning of the year. Oh, interesting. So, yeah, this may be the beginning of the year for everybody, for both calendars, of which I'm fully aware. So we have our t-shirt winners, Josh P and Sam R, two Patreon subscribers that I drew at random. And actually, this is kind of, I don't know, funny or sad or whatever. I was going to use the Patreon API and write a Python script and do all this stuff. And then I realized Patreon just lets me download a CSV with all the names and email addresses of people who have subscribed. So I put that CSV into Excel, and then I just randomize the rows. Totally. After telling everyone I was going to learn the Patreon API, it turns out I didn't even have to do that. I used trusty dusty Excel. But when after that random function, Josh P and Sam R were at the top of the list, and they both will be getting some pretty epic t-shirts. I'm probably going to send them out later on this week. This week being the week we record. So by the time you listen to this, I would have already sent out the shirts. But congrats to you two, and I hope you really like your
And thank
shirts.
you to all of our Patreon subscribers and to all of our listeners. Whether or not you support us, we thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll probably do this again. I don't know really the cadence or things like that. But we'll definitely do this again and do more giveaways like this. So thank you for subscribing, following us, following our link to Audible, checking out the books we recommend and things like that. That's really sort of what keeps sort of the whole show and all the expenses covered and keeps kind of everything together.
And if you're interested in a t-shirt, there's a link to it on programmingthrowdown.com on where you can get those.
That's right. It's pretty cool. There's a regular t-shirt and there's a ringer t-shirt, those are actually my favorite. The ringer t-shirts are the ones where the, what do you call it? The end of the sleeve, like that, I guess that
cuff?
ring. Yeah, the sleeve cuff is like kind of like a thicker material in a different color. So it kind of like grabs your arm. I don't know. I kind of like those shirts. But yeah, they're both available. And I think there's even a hoodie available if you're interested in that.
Well, I want to rant about online television.
All right.
I feel this is one of those things we can talk about, and then 5 years from now, then we'll look back and realize how crazy it was when this was a problem, like whether or not to buy a smartphone or other classic examples. And I don't have very good reception in my house, so I try to put up an antenna, it doesn't work. Cable's too expensive. Maybe that's just me being cheap. But I feel like for how much value I get out of it, actually paying for the normal cable subscription, they want to add all this extra stuff and it's too expensive. But I have been happy.
I agree, totally.
Okay, yeah. And this is increasingly common from what I understand. I think lots of people are cutting cable. But there's a lot of services, Sling TV, the PlayStation View, in America at least. And now there's like a Direct TV one. But one of the issues is there's still all these weird things that happen. Like my wife and I wanted to watch the Golden Globes on Sunday night, and we just assumed it would be on the PlayStation View, which is the one we currently use. And the guide said it was going to come on. I could set it to be recorded. We sat down, and then it was, just a kind of a message screen saying the rights to this are blocked by the network. And it was like,
no, really?
Yeah. So apparently, even though in kind of every other way, our subscription acts kind of like a cable subscription, there was some rights conflict between NBC and the kind of Golden Globes themselves about online streaming permissions. And there was basically no legal way to stream the Golden Globes online.
This is a huge mess. I mean, I have this problem with the Olympics where I feel like I think we talked about this last Olympics. We talked about how this Olympics would be totally on the internet, and then that didn't happen. But I feel like every Olympics, and this is true for the World Cup as well, the rules are different. Like the technology seems to be the same, and we could have streamed even 8 or 12 years ago the Olympics, but the policy is completely different. Like I think 2 Olympics ago you could see everything, and then the last Olympics they had kind of highlights, and I think this Olympics is the same as the last one where you could get highlights. But if you want to, just watch it as if it was a TV station, you had to have cable. And it's just kind of, I don't know. I feel like this is just like a house of cards. Basically, they've built up all of these different policies around when you could show and how you can show, and the advertisers, what they get and what they don't get, and what your commitment to them. And all it takes is really someone just kind of cracking this egg, like someone just getting a deal with the NBA, the NFL, and a few other networks, and the whole thing will just fall apart.
I don't know that will happen, though, because one of the issues is they negotiate really long contracts. And so I think part of the issue is like some of these, it's like for the next 5 or 10 years. And so those contracts may or may not talk about streaming. Streaming will change dramatically in 5 years, and they don't come up at the same time. And then also I think there's other issues in our consideration. But for me, it's just I'm pretty happy with my... First I had the Sling TV. That was pretty good. I actually like the PlayStation Vue much better. This isn't a pitch for them. I don't get paid by them. I wish.
You had the Roku at one point, right?
I still... Now I'm using the Amazon Fire TV. I think that one's pretty good. But I did have a Roku before, yeah. Mm-hmm. And it works really well. I really like it. But then you run into these weird things, like what happened. I should have been able to watch it. I was at the right time. It wasn't even an issue of recording it or not recording it. But there was just no way for me to watch it. And that was really frustrating.
I wonder, like... I mean, so Golden Globe... So this is going to sound terrible, but I don't even know what the Golden Globes are. I think it's for the best movies, right? Or no, that's the Oscars.
No,
so
it's similar. Globes? Yeah, similar. And this isn't a pitch. I actually don't care that much about the Golden Globes. It was more just like we'd seen some stuff about it. There was nothing else we were planning on watching. And it's just something that was like, oh, well, let's sit down and watch that. And then when you couldn't, it was like, oh, now I'm bummed.
Yeah, right. It's a forbidden fruit now, right?
Yeah, but I didn't even care that much about it. Like if I had just known I wouldn't be able to stream it, I wouldn't have cared.
I've started, I have a bunch of YouTube subscriptions, and that's just become my source of entertainment. Like YouTube and various kind of funny, pages on Facebook and the funny subreddit on Reddit. I just, I mean, to be fair, I didn't grow up with television. I actually never had cable TV until I met my wife and we moved in together. So my parents just never really had it. And so for me, it's like, it's not that unnatural to just be completely oblivious, like almost anything TV related, even really movies. I actually only recently saw the Star Wars, like the original movies. And so for me, it's all just YouTube and internet. And I feel as if that's just going to become more and more popular. And eventually, like, even if the contracts are for a long period of time, just the economics will collapse. But maybe that's not true. I mean, maybe our people are just really set. I know for like sports, for example, the NFL channel is always going to be popular. Like nothing's going to change that. They're not going to make a new set of teams or anything.
A YouTube only NFL?
Yeah, could you imagine? I mean, I guess it's totally possible, right? There's nothing. Well, the problem is you need to build the stadiums, right?
I don't know. And some people say the e-gaming or e-sports, but I just find those to be complicated in a way that isn't enjoyable in the same. And I'm not a big sports fan, but when I sit down and try to watch like streaming League of Legends on Twitch, it just confuses me.
Oh yeah, I actually like. There's people who play games on Twitch and they just kind of tell jokes and just like they have raffles for prizes and stuff while they're playing. And I find that to be like pretty good background noise.
Okay. Yeah, that could be interesting, like a person. But I mean, like watching the tournaments, I guess. I don't play football, but I understand watching football and I understand the game. Maybe just because I always have. But like sitting down and watching League of Legends, Yeah, I think we've talked about that before. But yeah, it just seems
Yeah, I
so
think
fast
that
moving and fast paced. It just seems it isn't really conducive to sitting back and just watching.
yeah, I think the problem with these games is you can't like zooming out doesn't really work. Like football, it works because you're zoomed out. Like if I was on the field, I wouldn't be able to see, everything would be just a blur. And they're moving so fast and they're so strong. Like I was blown away. I actually got an opportunity to go to Levi's Stadium, which people who don't know, that's the where the San Francisco 49ers play.
Well, where the San Francisco 49ers lose.
Where they actually again, I don't follow, but I heard that they did
really
like
bad.
The worst team in the league.
Yeah.
But yeah, actually I got to go on the field, which is really cool. But I had no idea like how big it is. And it's one of these things like, okay, it's 100 yards. It's very obvious. But like, unless you really go on the field, it doesn't really make sense. Like like the idea that like these players, they get tackled and sometimes they fall 4 yards. I mean, it's like an insane, that's 12 feet. Like someone fell like two heights of a person in length. Right. And so, my point is like, those people are moving really fast and it's totally insane. But when you zoom up really far and you're looking from a blimp or from a stadium seat, it just looks like little ants moving really slowly. And so you can watch football and kind of get an idea of what's going on. But for e-gaming, it doesn't really work. Like you're seeing the same screen as the person playing, and it's just a total blur, right? Maybe they need a special view for spectators, where it's zoomed out, but then you wouldn't be able to really make anything out,
Or maybe just
there's a reason why football fields are very bland looking, right?
Yeah, and I guess it's been around for longer, right? That football, there were lots of kinds of sports that aren't televised. I assume so. I don't know, or failed sports that nobody even plays anymore, just because they're not conducive, not interesting, whatever. So that's kind of a self-fulfilling thing. Football was interesting to people and it made good TV, which meant people were invested in tweaking it to make good TV. So eventually we'll come across a game that's both fun to play and very suitable for streaming, and then it'll catch on.
Yeah. I think though there's actually I think there's definitely something to making like basically two views of a game. So there's the person who's playing gets one view. But then if you're watching, if you're a spectator watching professionals play, the graphics will just change for you. In other words, like all the details of like the trees, all that stuff kind of becomes very bland so that you could understand what's going on. Like almost like cheating, but the actual people playing don't get that luxury,
Well, for the StarCraft competitions, I know they like remove the fog of war so that you can kind of see the ambush to happen and stuff. So that's similar to what you're saying.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Cool. But yeah, I agree. I think it's a total mess. It's like everything is a surprise. Like you go to watch the Olympics, like surprise, you need a Comcast account, right? And I don't know. I think I see your point that it probably won't get fixed either. It's kind of sad. But on the flip side, there's a lot of really awesome entertainment on YouTube and other sources. Okay, so on to news. This is pretty cool. This is one of these, security things I don't really know, don't have a strong background in, but it's actually okay because this link it's a presentation from a team called Team Pangu, and they're the team that has done the jailbreak on the most recent iPhones. And so they actually walk step by step through how to jailbreak, an iOS 7. And they don't actually walk you through how to do it to your own phone, but they walk through like specifically in terms of like the firmware and the software and the buffers and like exactly what is happening when you jailbreak your phone. And they describe sort of the arms race between them and Apple. So they say, look, iOS 7, we did this, and then Apple countered with this, and then iOS 8, we did that. And it's a PowerPoint presentation, so it's meant to be delivered to like a lay audience. not super technical. But it's really cool. The other thing I didn't realize, these people who do the jailbreaks are all Chinese, which is pretty cool. I had no idea that it was like a team out of China. I think it's awesome, and they kind of did a really good job kind of explaining who they are, what they've done, and it's part of they actually run a mobile security conference called MoSec. You can go to mosec.org and check it out. And that's in Shanghai. So if you're a security expert and you want to check out Shanghai, you could get your boss to get you to go to this conference. But yeah, I thought it was super cool and interesting. I always kind of wonder how these hacks actually work, and so they explain it in pretty good detail.
So is there any particular reason why it's a group out of China? Like, what did they explain the motivation, or just they happen to be the people most interested in it?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Like, it's obviously a lot of work. I guess if you're a security researcher, maybe it's paid work to do that. But that's one of the things that always interests me is, are people just that generous with their free time and that's what they want to work on?
Well, this is definitely a company where they're getting paid somehow.
Oh, okay.
My guess is, like who would pay to have a jailbreak for iPhone? I mean, obviously users, but no single user would pay enough money to justify it, and they're not really crowdfunding it. Yeah, it's a great question, right? Where's follow the money, right? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, if anybody out there knows, any of our listeners know, just in general, security firms that do commercial hacking, hack the PS4, hack the iPhone, hack the Android, who really funds those?
I assume many of the hacks are done by people trying to get money, right? So I'm trying to hack your account so I can use it as a botnet to make you click on my ads or click on the ads of my competitor, whatever it is that botnets do. So there's that kind of hacking. And so there's security researchers who spend a lot of time researching that so they can kind of show how, in white papers, how smart they are, that people will pay them to check out their stuff to make sure it's correct. So it's like a proof of work, I guess, because they can't talk about...
Oh, that makes sense.
Can't talk about, I went to Jason Co. and found 20 flaws and fixed them, because Jason Co. doesn't want to admit that it had any flaws. And so you have to do it in this way where you can kind of show your prowess.
That makes sense. I mean, the other thing is if I knew a group of people who are all very reputable in the security realm, and I was a giant company like a Google or a Microsoft or something, then maybe I would fund it. In other words, Microsoft has gives all their employees, I'm sure, Windows phones. And so if there's an exploit in the Windows phone, then that means someone can read Microsoft employee emails. And Microsoft's so big, they could afford to, pay one of these teams to try to hack their phone, just to prevent that, right?
There's also bounties some companies do. If you find a flaw, they'll give you, decent sized monetary rewards.
Yep.
Interesting. My next news article or link is to godbolt.org, godbolt.org. And
nice.
That doesn't explain what it is at all. But what it is a place for you, it's a compiler explorer for C++. It may support other stuff, but that was mostly how I came across it. And it's a way of typing in source code in one panel of the website. And on the other panel is the assembly output from GCC targeting various processors, but I think mostly Intel, maybe only Intel. And it will show you what the assembly instructions generated by the compiler for your source code are. And they have a little example
that's cool.
that it starts off with. It's not really that interesting, but you can kind of see it pushing onto the stack and kind of the rudimentary stuff. But where it really starts getting interesting is where you put in a little more elaborate code, or you start adding compiler optimizations, like turning on optimization level 3, so that's -03 for GCC, and then watching kind of what it does with the code as a result of that. So in the kind of
Whoa, that's cool.
Yeah,
I just did it,
okay.
and it went from like 10 instructions to 4.
Yeah, exactly. So in the kind of naive, non-optimized way, it's doing a lot more so you can see what's happening. But when you start turning on optimizations in the compiler, the code gets much more compact. You could also do like OS for optimize for size. Apparently I typed big S, it's a little s.
Yeah, that worked. Now I have 3.
Yeah. And so you can start to play with examples and see what happens. Even if you don't understand the assembly, just to kind of see how it interacts is interesting. But then as you start...
Will it do the what's it called? The SIMD? Like if you have a for loop, will it...
It will do
turn it into
unrolling.
SIMD?
It will do some unrolling, but I don't know if it'll do SIMD. Maybe it will.
Okay.
I would assume it does if you know what the flag for it is.
Oh, right. Yeah. Cool. This is awesome.
It was just really interesting to me. So typing it in and playing it with myself, by myself, was sort of interesting. But then going online and seeing examples other people had of interesting results was really cool too. So in some cases, kind of writing 2 equivalent expressions will produce vastly different results. Like the difference between a 1-line function and a 100-line function, because of how the optimizations in the compiler work, it was able to kind of detect an equivalency for one example, but not for the other. And so just sort of unexpected corner cases of compiler optimization are interesting. And you see a lot of those online from people who have played around with it.
I'm going to try, I've always wondered this. I've always wondered if it mattered if you did postfix or prefix incrementer inside of the for loop. And I'm going to prove it to myself one way or the other right now.
Or at least for GCC version 6.3.
So for GCC version 6.3...
No optimization.
Wait, should I do optimization?
Do it without...
I feel like I should.
Do it without starting.
Okay, I'll do without and I'll do with.
Oh, this is such good live podcasting. But while Jason does that, he'll come back with his results in a minute. Oh, there he goes.
I can tell you right now, it's 15 instructions if I do A++. If I do ++A, it's exactly the same. So it turns out this is something that I think I told the audience like a year ago that it doesn't matter.
Well,
and
for a primitive in the for loop where you're not using the result.
That's right. Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's, as you said, like an int. Like if it's object ++ and you've defined the prefix operator to be way more efficient, then yeah, all bets are off. But yeah, this is totally cool. I mean, this is already useful.
So for people, Jason's going to go prove a bunch of coworkers wrong. So for people who are interested about assembly or want to poke around with this is actually very informative. Even without kind of knowing what all the Intel instructions are, you can start to get a feel for it just by playing around with really simple instructions and seeing what's the same and what's different.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, my news is JSON logic. This is one of these things that's like, I have yet to think of a way this could be really useful, but it's just so interesting. I feel like there's got to be something useful in this. The idea is as it suggests, it's effectively a programming language in JSON where you write JSON. So, JSON is this container format. So it's like XML and these other container formats. And so, typically JSON would hold, a document with a bunch of fields like, name, Jason, age, blah, 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 right? JSON can hold, objects, can hold arrays, it can have arrays of objects of arrays, et cetera, et cetera. And it has a not really nice representation for storing data. The question always becomes, let's say you're trying to describe a topology of a neural network, or you're trying to describe some kind of process, like which function should I be using? You could have JSON, and you could have a bunch of C++ code that looks at your JSON and then invokes the right object, or looks at your JSON and then adds those two arguments together. this JSON logic actually lets you kind of write code kind of in JSON. You can add numbers in JSON. You can kind of have arbitrary equations in JSON, and then you can compile it with this, or interpret it, I suppose, or interpreter. And so a good example of this would be if you have sort of a bunch of parameters, like one parameter kind of makes your website kind of slower in this way, but faster for images. And you have another parameter that kind of tweaks your website in some other way. And you want to sort of play with these parameters based on sort of what's happening. Like, oh, if a lot of people are getting images, I want to like boost my image stuff. So it's almost like you want this sort of equation, but you want to be able to hot swap it. You want to be able to say, oh, I need my, I want this parameter plus that parameter is equal to that parameter. And like, I want to make that change right away. This will let you do that. And so it looks kind of cool. As soon as I find a project that can use it, I will give it a shot and let you know how it goes.
My next link is to a collection of interesting bitwise operators and tricks. Also an opportunity to talk about bitwise operators. But on this website, there are just, they're not numbered and I didn't count them, but dozens of bitwise operations and what they do. And it's nothing complicated, just like how to calculate 2 to the n. Well, that one's a little obvious, I guess, using left shift. Checking whether a number is a power of 2. Then there's some more interesting stuff like averaging 2 numbers using bitwise operators. Trying to find some other good ones. Set the rightmost 0 bit to 1. Turns out it's actually
fast
pretty easy.
Inverse square root. Wow.
Yeah, is that the one? One of those is famous. We were before the show talking about John Carmack. One of those is famous because John Carmack used it in Quake. Is it inverse square root?
I think he did the square root.
That might be.
But I'll look it up.
No, it's fast inverse square root. Yep, it's Carmack. And so it's
Carmack
just a list. Yeah. So there's just a list of kind of interesting operators. I don't know that there's a particular great reason to use these normally. I mean, they're really interesting. Your code is probably better off writing it all the way out than kind of using these condensed forms. But if you write really fast code...
This has the advantage where it's very hard to get fired if you used a lot of these because you've made yourself absolutely critical to... I'm just kidding. Yeah, I mean... I don't really see any reason for using these. Again, I think the compiler would do the optimization for you.
So if you're really trying to get code size down or really trying to get something accomplished fast, these are really cool. They're also really awesome for just thinking about this. And what I do wanted to call this out as part of it is I've talked to various people who are kind of, what are things to be ready for in preparing for an interview. And one of the things is bitwise operations come up a lot. And depending on where you are in the stack, you maybe get away without it. But for most people, kind of understanding how computers work is sort of a given. And part of how computers work is how bitwise operators work. And so being prepared to kind of talk about binary forms of numbers and manipulating those is something that's pretty important. So if you don't know that and you're kind of doing anything except for super, super high level work, that's something worth thinking about. And a page like this, although you may not remember them and you probably shouldn't use them, will get you thinking about those and kind of being a puzzle, see if you can figure out, or at least, looking at it, understand why it works, even if you couldn't come up with it on your own. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's
also
a
lot of these have references. Like, it's not just, here's a line of code. It actually have a link to a document explaining exactly what it's doing.
Yep. And so this is something I'd recommend for any of you who are kind of trying to interview or just interested in low-level code, to kind of brush up on bitwise operators. There's lots of links like this. This is just one I happened to run across that I thought had some kind of nifty operators in there.
Yeah, this is really cool. I actually sat on an interview years ago where the candidate was interviewing for a firmware engineer job. And there was all sorts of questions like this. Like, there was a bunch of numbers that were packed into 3 bits each. So each number was packed into 3 bits, and you had to sort of unpack them and things like that.
time for book of the show.
Book of the show. My book of the show is Richard Dawkins is the author. The book is The Selfish Gene. This is, I mean, I don't know if you'd call this controversial or not, but this is absolutely, so Richard Dawkins is an evolutionary biologist. And so, the whole book is explaining a facet of evolution. But the idea is, there's evolution, there's survival of the fittest, and there's, a lot of these terms that Charles Darwin and others have sort of coined that have become part of, common, like part of like common core, like what most people understand. But then there's this idea, like, there's sort of a number of things that sort of are, a little counterintuitive. Like, for example, cancer can kill almost anyone. There's some viruses that are incredibly powerful. And so why is humanity getting more and more complicated? Or why is just nature getting more and more complicated? Even though simple things seem to be very efficient and very powerful, it doesn't seem to fit with the survival of the fittest, right? And so that concept is called the arrow of complexity. The idea that just complexity in the universe keeps increasing. We don't really know why. There's another idea, which is if you believe in survival of the fittest kind of on an individual level, then a lot of these systems, like ecological systems, become unstable if you were to model them in this way. In other words, if all the lions are trying to kill and eat as many zebra as possible, then what happens is all the lions eat all the zebra and then everyone starves. So people had kind of wondered, maybe there's enough zebras that are faster than the lions that they live to an old age and stuff like that. But even then, it's like a very unstable equilibrium, and it didn't seem very likely. Richard Dawkins tackles a lot of these issues in The Selfish Gene, which is, I think, super interesting. Just not to do too much of a spoiler, but basically the idea is that the genetic code is the thing being selfish, not the individual. And so, in other words, a lion will not kill 10 zebras if it can only eat one. It will kill the one zebra and it will eat it. And it'll take so much time to eat it that the other 9 zebra get away, even if they're all slower. And so the idea is, like, Richard Dawkins makes this conjecture that the genetic code is selfish. So what that means is even if the lion can kill 10 zebras, it just won't, because the zebras and the lions are sharing much of the same genetic code, and that code is trying to be as diverse as possible. So if for whatever reason lions can't survive anymore, the genes themselves get to live on in the zebras or the fish, right? Or whatever. So the book covers a ton of things. I mean, this is just one of them. And he's also written several other books. But I just think these things are fascinating. I was very fortunate to have been able to ask Richard Dawkins a question. He was a keynote speaker at a conference, and he also took questions. And our team kind of submitted a question, which he answered. We were kind of asking about this era of complexity. And we asked, like, how this was actually before. I think he actually ended up writing about it later, but this was back like 2004. He actually explained kind of what he thought about that era of complexity, and he thought that it was trying to get new food. That basically, effectively, like, trees are trying to find new ways to keep the food away from us or make it harder to reach, and animals are trying to find new ways to get that food, and that sort of arms race is sort of what's making things more and more complex. But yeah, I think it's a super interesting read. Highly recommend it.
My book of the show is Abaddon's Gate by James S.A. Corey, which is a pen name for actually 2 authors. But this is the 3rd book in the Expanse series. And I can't say much about it since it's the 3rd book. Obviously, I read books 1 and 2, and so now I'm to the third, and I guess the test for a series like that is whether you're going to read the next book. And so I think I'll probably read book 4. So I guess that's a recommendation for book 3. And
why would they do a pen name? Do you know?
So I think just because it's a little
general.
easier to sell rather than having 2 authors' names on, so people.
Oh.
I don't. That's a good question. They probably have answered it. There's several interviews with the 2 authors. I'm sorry, I'm not saying their names right now. I don't remember what they were. But they kind of write as this person. They can kind of give this person their own character, I guess, and then write that way. And the series is pretty good. And one of the things is I didn't actually kind of realize that the TV version on the Sci-Fi channel, Sci-Fi channel, I don't know how you say that.
They changed it, Sci-Fi or something, right?
Yeah, and so on that channel, I watched the first couple episodes of the Expanse TV series, and although it's not kind of accurate to page by page in the book, they have very much the same feel and very much the same themes, and I found it, although it's pretty dark, it's overall the series itself is kind of dark, and so the TV show was pretty dark, but I found myself enjoying it, and I saw a brief interview with the 2 authors who consult heavily.
Yeah, the authors, I can tell you the names are Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank.
Okay, thank you. The internet, it's so useful. And so they were interviewing them about the Expanse TV show. And one of the things they were saying is that they're writers of the book and they consult and kind of give ideas, but ultimately there are people who understand writing for TV, choosing what themes to pull forward and what parts of the story to modify to make it make sense for TV. So they're what they call those like screenwriters, I guess. Those people, right. Yeah. And they consult with the 2 authors, but they're trying to have a relationship so that it doesn't have to be true to the book at the expense of bad TV, but not great TV, and it's just inspired by the book. So it strikes a good middle ground.
Yep, it's similar to The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead, at first I read all the comics, and then when the show came out, I was like, hey, Linz, to my wife, I was like, hey, you should check out this show. And I kind of was pretty sure she wasn't going to like it because the book is sort of very kind of tactical, and it talks a lot about, surviving in the zombie apocalypse, and it's also kind of gruesome, and there's just not a lot of like touchy-feely or like emotion type stuff in the comic. And when we watched it, we both realized that like they actually kind of made it into more of a drama to fit sort of the TV medium, and as a result, we both now really like it.
Yeah, so The Expanse is good. If you aren't really a book reader, but you do watch TV, I'd recommend checking out the TV series. And if you've read the book and you haven't checked out the TV series, do that as well, because you'll kind of know you don't know what's about to happen, but you kind of know what's going to happen, if that makes sense. So eventually the things are going to happen, but they may happen sort of differently than you expect.
Yep. Yeah, totally.
So it's still worth watching is what I'm saying.
Cool. And that's on, it's on Sci-Fi. So I guess you'd get that through like Hulu, Netflix, or that other thing that we don't pay attention to.
There's streaming TV as well if you have TV that streams Sci-Fi. Yeah, there's lots of ways to get it. I'm not going to go through them all.
Gotcha.
Depending on your... Well, yeah, anyways. And I actually listen to that on Audible because I have a long commute, and that's how I do most of my reading. I just call it reading. Maybe that's unethical, immoral.
I think it's reading. No, I think you're absolutely right. Because listening is too generic, right?
Yeah, it sounds confusing. I was talking to someone today, and I was like, oh, I read a lot of sci-fi. And then they were kind of like, looked at me, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't read it. I listen to it. And they were like, what? And I was like, in the car, because, I commute. And then I just listened to it. And they were saying how they couldn't do it. But for me, it's really good because it allows me to kind of do something I enjoy, which is reading these books. But I don't have a lot of time to sit down and actually, do page turning.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have you ever, started have you ever got so lost in that world that you just show up at work and you're just like, what happened?
Yes.
I feel like that would happen to me almost every day.
It does happen to me sometimes, and it's really scary. And I don't know whether I actually was paying attention on the road, and then my brain just didn't bother to record it.
A slew of like just carnage behind you.
Yeah. But anyways, so this is also Audible is a sponsor of the show, and so if you've never tried Audible,
not anymore.
Oh dear.
No, I'm just kidding.
Anyways, if you're interested, they have a thing where they'll give you the first book free as like a part of a trial, and then after you get that book, you're welcome to cancel the subscription. And what they do is the typical thing is you get one book a month, 1 credit a month, which is good. I've never found a book that was more than a credit, but I guess it could happen. And so You can go to audibletrial.com/programming throwdown. I really like Audible. I still pay for my own subscription, and I really enjoy the books I get on there, and kind of making my commute that much easier. Well, it's still pretty crappy, but at least it's a little less crappy.
Yeah. Actually, maybe next month's news, someone did this awesome visualization of traffic in the Bay Area. And I'll make that news next month if I remember.
So I'm going to create a new slogan for Audible, making Patrick's commute a little less crappy.
There you go.
I'll send that to them.
We're also on Patreon. So you should go to patreon.com/programming throwdown. And that's how that's how Josh P and Sam R got their free t-shirts. They were lucky Patreon subscribers. But that really kind of helps us out. It goes straight to the show. We have an account for it. It's not like going into our pockets or anything like that. All of it gets redistributed back to help the show in some form or another. So thanks for that. And it's time for
Tool of the show.
So my mission, every year I set a mission. I don't really call it a resolution because I feel like resolution implies that there's a problem that you want to resolve. This is more just like a goal. And if I meet it, it's great. If not, my life doesn't really change that much. It's always kind of something small. Like one year, it was look people in the eyes when I talk to them. Another year it was I think it was like something about being more polite. There's another, I don't know. It's I've been doing this for a long time. Sometimes they're kind of technical. This year it's about organization. So I found when I was kind of reflecting back on the past few months that when I was kind of more organized at work, I got a lot more done. The people around me got a lot more done. And I could actually just see this almost perfect correlation as I was kind of walking through the past few months. This perfect correlation between when I was organized and our sort of velocity and my velocity. Now, part of that is there's like a chicken and an egg there. Like part of it was I was disorganized because it was a disorganized time in the project. And so, I don't think that it's solely because of that, right? But it's still something I want to work on. And it's not only getting more organized, but it's also being more efficient with the organizing. Like I want to be able to, take notes, write to-dos, set deadlines for myself, get notified when it's close to those deadlines, check the box when I'm done with them. And I want to do all of this really quickly so I don't have to waste a lot of time. And so my tool of the show is this thing called Emacs Org Mode, org for organization. So for people who aren't Emacs users, Emacs has major modes. So the idea is if you're editing a C++ file, you're in C++ mode. If you're editing an HTML file, you're in web mode. And the mode, there's like a massive amount of logic behind each mode, right? So the syntax highlighting is totally different, things like that. Org mode is just a completely different environment inside Emacs where you have like a calendar, you have like to-do lists, and you have all these different ways to stay organized. It's incredibly complicated. I downloaded it and all of that. That was very straightforward. And I was like, let me check out the manual. I was expecting, maybe an 8-page manual. There's like a 300-page manual on org mode, which makes me think like maybe the only people left using Emacs are people who like don't do that much coding anymore. I don't know. Like the median age of Emacs users maybe now is like 40 or something. But it looks awesome. I'm just getting into it. And that's my tool of the show. So far, I can say that you can very quickly get up to speed and do some simple things with org mode.
Very nice. My tool is cpplint.py, which is a C++ linter by... I think this one's actually made by Google. So it's for the Google style guide. But I also simultaneously would recommend there's an LLVM, or I guess a Clang linter as well, that will do more than just the Google style guide. It actually can do other style guide. Anyway, so linters are my tool of the show. And the reason why is because I find that if you have a style guide for whatever code you're writing in whatever language, that is super useful. And I'm not a big proponent of nitpicking to death people, but keeping everything consistent. And the easiest way I know to do that is to have a linter that just every time someone makes a change, just kind of already will tell them when they're not matching the expected style. And I'm not one for getting into debating whether you use Google has a C++ style guide. I think there's a Linux C style guide. There's which isn't C++, but then there's other versions and other people have style. And someone, kind of the other day was arguing for some new code to use this other kind of style that they preferred. And one of the things I asked them was, is there a linter, or have you kind of a lint rules for some linter for that your way you're saying that it should be done? And they were kind of like, well, no. And I was like, to me, that's a huge negative where I don't want to adopt your way, not because I particularly think it's bad, but if you don't have a linter for it, to me, that's really frustrating because it doesn't keep everyone honest, and it doesn't allow,
Yep.
It allows people to kind of get away when they don't really want to do it, or they don't particularly, they don't agree with it. It's just messy. And so I think just having everybody agree and then having a linter is a kind of way to not have conflict.
Yeah, and just to explain, we've covered this in other shows, but a linter is just something where it will look at your source code and tell you when you violated the style guide. Like it'll actually scan your whole source code and say, hey, at line 46, you have an extra space. On line 48, this new line doesn't need to be there. And then there's also a formatter. Like Clang has a linter and also Clang format.
Oh, I guess
the Clang everything.
The Clang linter is part of Clang format.
Right. Yeah. And so it will it can also just fix almost all the lint errors for you. Cool.
And I'm not. Awesome. I'm also. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say I'm the same way. Like I don't enforce the rules in code reviews and things like that, but I do think that you need a system that annoys people who have lint errors. In other words, like there's a system. Every place I've worked has had a system in place where if you don't put a space somewhere, it gives you a little warning when you try and submit your code. And then as long as that system exists, I leave the rest up to leave it to the honor system, like let people fix their own issues. But if that system doesn't exist, then it's just like the Wild West. Like you have to enforce it, personally, like socially, and nobody wants to do that.
Yeah, so this is sort of similar to what I was going to say, which is I don't make the linter a hard fail. Some people do. But in my opinion, there's certain times when you should be allowed to kind of break it if you think there's a really good reason for it. And I'm not going to care. But as you said, I've been on teams before that had nothing, and then somebody just forgets or whatever in a code review, and then you start having a bunch of code that doesn't comply, and then it's a huge hassle to change it. And I think just having an agreed upon style guide keeps the code easy to read.
Yep, totally.
So linters are my tool of the show.
That's awesome. Yeah. So, all right, PHP and Hack. So first, shout out to Cyrus. We won't spoil your last name, but Cyrus emailed us and said, "Hey guys, you haven't done PHP. Why don't you talk about PHP and WordPress?" And so, because you emailed us, this is exactly what we're going to do. PHP is a huge language in terms of user base. Tons of people use it. It's amazing we haven't covered it. I actually had to do a double check to make sure we haven't covered it in the past. And, to kind of motivate PHP, everyone's kind of done templating, right? Like, for example, if you do printf, my name is %s, and then comma, and then your name, right? You could even do all sorts of crazy logic after the comma. It could be whatever C code you want, but then at the end, it's some string, and then that %s, the what you put in after that comma gets substituted into the %s. And you could be really complicated. You could have %2d, and it puts a number there with 2 decimal places and everything, right? If you use Python, they have the format function, does the same thing. It even has the same syntax. Almost every language has some type of substitution, some way of doing substitution like that. And that's called templating. So PHP, at least when it started, is effectively a way to do templating with HTML. So you could write a bunch of HTML, and then a little different than printf. In the case of printf, you do all these %s's, and then all of your arguments come afterwards. In the case of PHP, you write all this HTML, and then in the HTML itself, you do like a PHP bracket, and you have some PHP code. But at the end of the day, it's still kind of templating, like printf kind of stuff, right? Now, why is this important? So put yourself back to the 1990s, right? Like, browsers were just crazy. Like the iPhone wasn't out yet. Smartphones weren't really out yet, really at all. And the web browsers, there's just not really any compatibility. Like, you would be lucky if they all rendered the HTML even remotely the same way. JavaScript, forget it. Like, if you had a bunch of complicated JavaScript or even simple JavaScript, there's no way you could guarantee that even 90% of browsers would render it correctly. And so what that means is you have to do everything on the server side. So someone, clicks a checkbox, you have to actually go to the server, re-render the entire HTML, like what the whole universe looks like now that checkbox has been checked, and send that over to the client. The client's going to refresh the whole browser. And I mean, if you've ever seen old websites, like maybe like your hospital, like doctor website still works this way or something, but like that's how the whole internet worked. And everything was done on the server. And so, that made these server templating libraries like PHP really popular.
PHP, like a lot of people do like to rag on it. I think because it's like any beginner programming language, a lot of people kind of did it as one of their first programming languages. And when you do that, I think it opens it up to a lot of criticism or hate as a inferior language, and also just quirkiness. But, it does have a lot of libraries. PHP's been around for a while. There's a lot of support for it. There's a lot of different tools to get done what you need to get done and do the things you're trying to do in it. And there's also a ton of tutorials because it's such a popular beginner's language, or has been a popular beginner's language. Then you get a lot of people writing about it and answering a lot of common problems that beginners tend to have, and a lot of code examples, a lot of legacy code that you can look at to kind of understand how to do stuff.
Yep. One thing PHP does really well, not the language itself, but the maintainers do really well, is the documentation. Like if you were to type PHP printf and you actually go to the PHP site and look at the printf documentation, it's almost like a wiki type style. Like there's the official documentation, and then there's all this user contributed content, and that they keep that from version to version. So it's pretty cool. Like if you look up even just printf, PHP printf, you'll see all these things. Like people say, oh, here's some hack for this. Here's some way to do that. If you want to print an object, here's some code. And it's almost like a living manual of PHP, which I thought was kind of clever, and also helps with the beginner aspect. Just to kind of breeze through some of the details of PHP, it's a weakly typed language. So you just say, I equals 3, and then later on, if you want to say I equals Jim, you can do that. It's fine. It's all of the arrays. So PHP only has object, which is kind of like a class, and it gets basically PHP only has arrays, but they're associative arrays, and so even objects and classes are kind of represented using these associative arrays. But it kind of begs the question, like, what if I just want an array of 10 numbers and I want to index into it? You can actually do that. You can create what we would traditionally call in C or C++ an array. And what PHP does is, under the hood, it's still an associative array, but PHP will let you, iterate over it. And when you ask for item 1, it still works. But under the hood, everything is effectively a map in PHP. It's either a primitive number, like a double or a string, a primitive variable, like a double or a string, or it's a map. In PHP 3, they added classes, which is kind of syntactic sugar, but obviously very useful. So you have classes with properties and all of that. The biggest advance came from Facebook. So Facebook wrote a language called Hack. Hack is completely backwards compatible with PHP. So in other words, you could take like WordPress, which is a very popular PHP library or tool. You can actually take that and run it in Hack. So anything that's built in PHP will work with Hack. But you can also there's some more keywords and some more things you can do in Hack that you can't do in PHP, which is pretty cool too.
One of the other things is it can be compiled. So instead of being interpreted as traditionally, you can compile it and then run it on the HHVM virtual machine. And that allows the code to be faster because, as we were talking about earlier in the one of the news/sites, was the Godbolt and compiler optimizations and how it does that. And so by doing even just a little bit of compilation, you get the ability to kind of optimize things, shift stuff around. And that's awesome because it allows the programmer to still write something that's very readable without sacrificing speed.
Yep. Yeah, totally. So just to kind of dive into some of the things Hack adds, one is it adds types, which is very similar to TypeScript. So, you can take just a regular JavaScript file and rename it .ts instead of JS, and it's now TypeScript, and it works fine. But once you've done that and you're using the TypeScript compiler, now you can actually go and add like int a equals 3 instead of just a equals 3, right? Or like this function takes an int x and a float y, right? So Hack is the same way. And you can slowly over time add types to your code base. And Hack will understand if it doesn't see a type that type could be anything. But if it does see a type, it can call out a compiler error. Hack adds generics, which are super useful, right? I mean, if you want if you want like a set data structure, but you want it to be a set of anything, you can do that with Hack. And it works similar to C++. You do set, angle bracket, string angle bracket, and now you have a set of strings. It's got collections, so you don't even have to write the set. It's already done for you. So it has set, as hash set, hash map. A lot of these common collections that you'd see in Java and other languages. It has Lambda functions, which now we have in Java 8. Those are just, if you remember, they're just functions as first-class citizens. So I could say f equals some function and then pass f to another function or another object. And that object can hold on to f and call it whenever it wants. It also has async support, which is super important, right? Like if you can actually call a function and then pass it a callback, and it'll execute that callback kind of whenever it returns. So just this asynchronous kind of mode of programming, which we talked a lot about in the Node.js episode.
So if you're asking yourself, I'm starting a new project, should I use PHP? I don't think it's the language du jour, or that sounds too fancy pants. It's not the kind of language of the moment. It's not the hot language, but I mean, my understanding, it's still pretty commonly used, even for kind of new stuff, because there's a lot of people have been doing it for a long time. And so they're really good at it. They know how to do it. It gets the job done. And often that's very important. But there's also a lot of legacy stuff written in PHP. And so if you kind of join a project or team that has that, you could very well find yourself maintaining PHP code. But I wouldn't say it's probably the number one choice most people have for the problems on the web. I think there's a lot of other kind of new JavaScript solutions to that, or Node.js on the server to kind of accomplish some of the same ideas. And so I wouldn't say it's commonly chosen today, but there are probably some areas where it is. And for people who have been doing it, it obviously will be a kind of something at hand for them to choose. And then, that legacy code just doesn't go away. There's a lot of time invested in that. And so I would say there's still probably a lot of people's days are spent still writing in PHP.
Yep. So just to put it in perspective, so they actually just released this, the TIOBE. I don't know if I'm supposed to spell that out or not, TIOB, but the TIOB index, they use GitHub and a bunch of other metrics to try to predict or to demonstrate sort of which language is the most popular. And PHP dropped from 6th to 10th between January 2016 and January 2017. And I think a lot of that is just because, a combination of Python, Node.js, and some of these other languages are just kind of, picking up more steam. But I mean, the fact that it's 10th is still very powerful. I mean, there's as Patrick said, there's just tons of people using it.
But also, I think measures like that, I'm not familiar with that exact one and the methodology, but I think measures like that where you're kind of looking on GitHub and stuff, that's probably a lot of new public development. But,
that's
a
true.
lot of lines of code get written in legacy systems, not just maintenance, but new features being added. And so, I think those metrics probably skew to new starts. Like there's a weighting to the languages that new projects are started in.
Yep. Yeah, it's a really good point. PHP is just insanely popular. So where is PHP used? Wow, so many apps are especially open source apps are built in PHP. WordPress is probably the most common. PHP BB, which is a forum. The reason why it's BB, it's from the phrase bulletin board, right? Did you ever go on bulletin boards?
No.
Oh yeah, me neither. I have friends who have like really awesome stories about things they did on bulletin boards, like RPGs that they played using message passing. But
I think I should invent a past history where I did, but
just so you could regale us with your bulletin board stories.
When I was a kid,
back in my day, we passed punch cards back and forth. PHP MyAdmin, like if you have a MySQL instance, this is the web interface to that. That's extremely popular. I've used all of these. Gallery, Drupal, MediaWiki, like Wikipedia itself is all written in PHP and is open source. Joomla, which is a super popular content management system. So just a ton of really powerful apps have been written in PHP, and they're so extensible. People have written so many. It's almost like Emacs or VI, right? People have written so many extensions to these apps that it's just very hard to make them obsolete. And I'm sure they'll be around for the next 10 years. So so that's PHP in a nutshell. I mean, as Patrick said, I also wouldn't really recommend using it for a new project. I think Node.js, Python, these other ones are kind of, even like Ruby to a lesser extent, are kind of making PHP obsolete. But it's still an important language to learn. If you're looking for a job, there's a good chance there'll be some PHP involved. And let us know what you think. If you've built anything amazing in PHP that you have on GitHub or somewhere else, let us know, and we'll talk about it on the next show.
So to wrap it up, we'll repeat the kind of tools and books we mentioned in the middle of the show, so that this is easily you can scrub to this part easily. And that was the Selfish Gene, Abaddon's Gate. Those were the two books. And then Jason recommended Emacs org mode as a tool of the show, and I recommended linters. I don't know that that's really actually helpful to say I recommended linters. Okay.
No, I think
the
people
books
should
are
use
good.
linters. Yeah. Well, no, I think linter is actually a great tool because it's one of these things that it takes a little bit of work, and a lot of people don't want to put in, myself included, don't really want to put in the time to integrate it into your workflow. But then we're always so glad we did, and so hopefully we can pass that nugget of knowledge.
Linters are definitely useful. I meant repeating linters at the end for people to look up.
All right, sorry.
Never mind.
That's awesome.
But thanks everyone for all our listeners and sticking with us. Jason and I were just regaling each other with stories of yore from the podcast of old. Wow, that sounded awesome. And
right.
We've been doing this a while, but we enjoy it, and we always enjoy hearing from everyone out there in listener land.
Yeah, one thing, if someone bought a T-shirt, so I bought a T-shirt, just to make sure that it wasn't going to be, that it was going to be good quality and all of that. And I feel like it's good. I mean, I like it. I wear it to work sometimes, which is super cheesy.
What? No.
I know. I know.
Self-promotion.
I know it's kind of cheesy, but no. If you bought a shirt, I know a few people have bought a shirt. Actually, many people have bought a shirt. And if you have, let me know. Send us an email. If you think the logo is too big, too small, if you think the T-shirt's amazing, let us know what you think. The T-shirt is still a rather new part of the show, and so we're looking for your feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we don't need to know. We already know if you buy it because we know. But
don't just tell us you bought it. Yeah.
But send us like a picture or hashtag us or tweet us or whatever the cool kids do these days about a picture of you wearing it somewhere cool. That would be awesome.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, if you have yourself wearing the shirt anywhere, but if it's on like the Grand Canyon or something, that'd be even more epic.
Wait, why the Grand Canyon? Because that's like nothing to do with our show. I feel like wearing it to a computer history museum or wearing it in front of your awesome, VI themed editor or, whatever, something.
Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah, it needs to be like
something nerdy.
Like next to a wax statue of Richard Stallman or something. If you have that picture or any others wearing your T-shirt, post it and do at Programming Throwdown, or in the case of Twitter, at Neural Nets for Life, and we will retweet you and reshare you and embarrass you. And if you want us to, if not,
no, we won't embarrass you. If you embarrass yourself, we'll just do the honor of promoting that.
That's true. Yeah, we'll amplify your embarrassment. So, but that'd be really cool. Actually, it's a great idea. Either way, let us know what you think of the shirts.
All right, till next time.
See you later.
The intro music is Axo by Binar Pilot. Programming Throwdown is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 2.0 license. You're free to share, copy, distribute, transmit the work, to remix, adapt the work, but you must provide attribution to Patrick and I, and share alike in kind.